All right, y'all, it's Tuesday. That's Corey. That's Blake. That's Juice. I'm Andrew Baydala. Welcome to Final Bell Media's Episode 3 review of Who Killed WCW. How's everybody doing tonight, gentlemen?
Pretty fantastic. Interesting show, to say the least. So definitely ready to get into it.
I agree. I'm going to pass it over to Corey, the host. Go ahead, buddy.
So, guys, we just finished watching, as you all, and appreciate everybody tuning in and everything tonight. Bit of different format tonight. Usually we come on a little later, but figure we go live right after this show today. So appreciate y'all tuning in. Something that jumped out at me immediately with this show, and I kind of went into it with this expectation, not necessarily a negative one, but I almost feel like this was the show that was kind of, it's that show between, you had a first show that introduced, kind of what was going on with what WCW was, who Eric Bischoff was. You kind of had a meat and potatoes type of situation last week where it's pretty much talking about the height of WCW, everything that was going on. You got Goldberg winning the championship, the oversaturation in the NWO, things of that nature. This show kind of takes you, and it almost feels like this is what WCW was going into. And it's so funny how the series follows kind of how you felt about WCW as a whole as a company. This show tonight was kind of the one that was kind of like, oh, we see what's going on and why this is so bad after its, ascension to the height of heights that it was at. And they talked about how they were initially talking about the trying to book the younger guys into a position where they were being showcased, and they talked about Chris Benoit winning the World Heavyweight Championship there, and Kevin Sullivan being in charge of creative. And then boom, you have Monday Night Raw in January of 2000. Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn are all on Monday Night Raw. And I remember watching that live, and I'm thinking to myself, Benoit just won the world title. Like, he just won it.
Yeah, 15 days before that.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Exactly. And Juice, I'm going to actually go to you first.
Cool.
I know you probably went back and have watched this a ton of times with the Radicals debuting on WWF.
Right.
What was the impact that you thought of that at that time, looking at that and saying, oh my goodness, all of those guys were just prominent main faces on WCW?
First of all, everybody, glad to be back. This is another depressing episode as the longtime WCW fan. This is like the one I was dreading. I mean, next week, I don't even know if I'll show up. So we'll see. This might be the last one. But no, it's wild. There was actually a point made, an emphasis point there during this episode that I don't know why I never really thought of it like this, although I tweeted something similar in this realm earlier tonight. With the younger talent. It is wild to me that, because I think for a long time, I never really gave the Radicals jumping, all four of them jumping to WWF at the time, to be such a big deal. But whenever they referenced it as, look, this had been going on for a long time, but up until that point, it was all the older guys that were established even 7 years prior to jump and do that. But that's when they were at their prime and had a little bit left to go.
Juice, you were like 10 years old at this point, right? I'm not trying to be a dick. I'm just
saying.
No,
in 2000, I was 7.
Okay, so to that point, when you're seeing these guys and, jump over to WWF, like you said, it really didn't resonate with you. As a teenager, for me, I was like, holy shit. Yeah. So do you put your points valid?
Yeah, but I think you guys are missing a big portion of what Juice brought up, and because that same moment stuck with me. And it stuck with me because I forget who brought it up, but they said, I think it might have been Guy Evans, you saw it the other way. Defections from WWE to WCW. If you go back and think about that time period, I mean, outside of X-Pac and Jeff Jarrett, who flopped back and forth every single year back in those days, nobody really went from WCW to WWE during that period. Everybody was going the opposite way.
Yeah,
so
the younger
not only
talent
Chris Benoit winning the title, but the fact that 4 major people jumped to WWE, that's why it was so big and so such a difference maker.
Right. And the other part is when you realize even like Perry Saturn, Dean Malenko, I think in the grand scheme of things didn't amount to what they probably could have in WWF. I think their careers were better. Perry Saturn's at least in ECW. Dean Malenko was number one in the PWI 500, if that means anything to you, in WCW in '97. But Benoit and Guerrero, even just 2 out of those 4, if you bat, 3 out of 10 every time you're in the Hall of Fame, getting 2 out of those 4 guys, and you saw, regardless of what your thoughts are after the fact, the end of WrestleMania 20, one of the biggest WrestleManias of all time, had Benoit and Guerrero celebrating as best friends. The 3 years after, 4 years after this all transpired shows you actually how important that jump was. And I like, to Blake's point, the emphasis of just, we never really saw anybody go to WWE because they knew, like, if we need them, we'll utilize them. They got the oddities over. They got anybody over. They didn't need to just bring in other people. WCW needed to do that. They only had maybe 3 or 4 homegrown talent like Goldberg. And then once they got rid of the title off him, they didn't know what to do with him.
Yeah, I was at WrestleMania 20, and I would have never expected both Benoit and Guerrero to close a garden-based WWE WrestleMania. I never thought that would happen in WWE.
Potentially the last Garden Mania.
I think that is the last Garden Mania. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And something else that they said, and you all have already touched on it. They were saying it was big because these guys, like you all were alluding to, were coming over with still their best years ahead of them. And Blake, I'll go to you. Seeing that and realizing, at least this is in hindsight, because we, like you all mentioned, Saturn and Malenko kind of didn't pan out definitely the way Benoit and Guerrero did. But seeing it at that time, Blake, that impact that you saw that WWF was bringing over not only just WCW talent, but it was up and coming and budding WCW talent. How much of an effect do you think that had on WWF's morale of bringing over that type of talent?
I think it has a bigger effect than, say, bringing over a Hogan or a Nash or somebody like that, because, the thing WWE's always had, or WWF at the time's always had over their competitors is, yes, there's been some egos in there, but it's always been company first. It's always been about WWF or WWE. It is now. It was back then. So had they have brought in, for somebody like Steve and Rock and guys like that were on top at the time, they're not necessarily worried about Benoit and Guerrero and Perry Saturn and Dean Malenko taking their spots like they might be if Nash and Hogan and Goldberg come over. So I think it was very smart and calculated by Bruce Pritchard and Vince and the team that were running WWE at the time, because it was major pieces of the talent they could possibly do something with, but it wasn't pieces of the talent that would necessarily rock the boat with their top guys at the time either.
Yeah, it was almost like it was a willingness to more than likely work with these guys, because not, degrading their talent, but you didn't feel the threat of this guy was coming to take my spot. It was almost like they were not enhancement talent, but literally they were enhancement talent that was going to help that roster.
There's not a wrestling fan on the planet, in my opinion, back then that would tell you that they thought Chris Benoit was going to debut and then main event WrestleMania. He was like 5'8" and like 220 pounds. He was not Vince's kind of guy, but he made it work. So, no, you didn't think those guys were going over to WWF to be top guys like Eddie and Chris ended up being.
Right. Absolutely. Drew, so with all of that happening at that point, Eric Bischoff talks about he sees this happening and he's pretty much waiting by the phone because he is for sure that they're going to call him back to come back to WCW and run things again. And Eric talks about how he came back under the notion that he was going to be overseeing Vince Russo and overseeing creative. And Vince Russo was under the impression that that was not the case, and he never saw Eric as being the person that was going to be over him. Do you think that created some kind of a conflict of interest, that they had these two mindsets about what the other was doing or what role they were in?
Oh, absolutely. Eric was a smart man and continues to be a smart man. Now he got his contract redone because what happened is that they investigated Eric Bischoff for embezzlement of company funds. And then Bischoff went home, saw Russo and what was going on there. And then he decided, you want to know what? You want me back? Sure, but I'm coming back for the money and the power. And at the end of the day, you can say whatever you want, but I believe when WCW did that to Eric, they investigated him, they ripped the guts out of Eric Bischoff, and they really ripped the foundation and the guts out of WCW because he was the only man that would literally die for WCW that wanted to put Vince McMahon and WWF out of business. Everybody else was just there to collect a check. And when they brought in Russo and he decided to write his way of programming, which is Crash TV, and it worked for a little bit. And then they figured out it wasn't working, and Vince wanted to, do his thing, but WCW and Brad Siegel had other ideas. They wanted a committee, and Vince was like, no, I'm going home. Eric just became another one of the guys collecting a check and making big money, and that was it. And it's unfortunate because Eric was that guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And Juice, I know you were nodding your head. Go ahead. What were you going to say about it?
Oh, no, it was just on Drew's point of Vince Russo came in and he says, he mentions it, but he kind of downplays it. He's like, the ratings got better, a little bit, but they got better. Like he emphasizes that they got better, even though the margin was maybe very minuscule. And I talked about this with Drew a little bit earlier off air, where he comes in and Fall Brawl 99 is that first show with Bischoff getting canned the day before. So that's really out of the realm of Russo. Halloween Havoc 99, they did actually reference in this show where Hogan lays down and it's like a worked shoot, mishmash, whatever. And a lot of people don't even go to that as the beginning of the Russo thing, considering the Bash of the Beach incident that we'll obviously discuss later. But things kind of never were, not Crash TV once Russo got in. I think his claim to fame to a lot of people is in the tournament realm. Survivor Series 98 was the huge thing that Russo kind of put forth, and it was his, amazing storytelling. And in fact, after Havoc 99, they did a tournament. Mayhem 99 was a huge tournament to declare the champion. So things might have just been, what he wanted, but I don't know how the ratings they never were going to get higher or to the level that he had when he was back in the WWF.
Corey, for me, I want to just say this, and everybody else obviously on this panel. This episode for me was very much the Vince Russo versus Eric Bischoff word. It was Bischoff says this and was doing that and was told this, and Russo is telling you something completely different. That's what I got from this episode. It was those two were just never on the same page. And when Eric came back, he went back for the money. And the other thing that I found that was ridiculous and completely full of shit was Vince Russo left WWF because Vince McMahon wanted him to write another show, which was SmackDown. But he left that to go work for WCW, where he became the head booker of both WCW Nitro and WCW Thunder. It was all about the money. Don't let anybody bullshit you. It was about the money. And Vince kind of touched on
that. He's never denied that.
He's touched on it a little bit, but I mean...
He said he was having a mental breakdown at the end of that run with WWE. So
give me more.
That. I mean,
give me more, but I'll hide it with the money.
Gave him a raise. So
but
sure. Anybody would do more if you give it a raise.
Everybody's going to WCW no matter what their personal situation is because the money's there.
But what I'm saying is...
I want to finish, Drew, and then I want to back up on something.
What I'm saying is Russo contradicts himself here because he's like, I had a nervous breakdown. It was it was too much for me. I couldn't do all this, and I had 3 young kids and everything else like that. But it was okay for him to leave his 3 young kids at home for bigger money. It's the same. All right, so they say it was the money.
Bullshit walks.
It's not. I'm having a nervous breakdown because of the stress that was piled on me because of all
He says in there, Vince wanted me to do more work and didn't offer more money. I mean, yes, he didn't say it's about the money, but he's never denied that. I mean, that's
true,
anybody.
Blake. And my other caveat before you go to your point, Blake, is that you made a point, if he leaves, if he's being told by Vince McMahon what to do and it's getting hammered into him, we know how stressful that can be. Well, we don't know, but we've heard, stories. Right. If he goes to WCW and he's like, here, you just run the show, that might alleviate some of that. And it's like, hey,
100%.
not only am I
That's it.
I'm going to get
He
paid
thought
more
he
and I
not
can
only
run
was
it how I
getting
want to
paid
do it.
more, but he was being
Why
the
not?
boss.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I thought
Now,
Russo
I want to
contradicted
go.
himself.
So I want to go back to this because
Yeah.
there were two big points in this episode to me, which is the first one was what Juice brought up with, and then the second one was the back and forth that was in this episode between Vince and Brad Siegel and Eric, because this illustrates perfectly to me. I've watched you guys talk about this the last couple of weeks. What really killed WCW, and it was bad management from Turner. It wasn't Eric. Yes, he had a role. Vince had a role. Booking had a role. All that stuff. But that's what bad management is. What killed this company, because you can see, and yes, it was edited, but the impression that both guys give you is that Brad Siegel told one guy one thing and one guy the other.
Yeah, it's a very good point, Blake.
That's never going to work together if both guys think they're the boss. It's never going to work. So from the jump, the Bischoff and Russo pairing was dead on arrival and was not going to work because they both thought they were calling the shots.
Yeah, and the lack of communication was terrible. Absolutely terrible.
Yes. And your point, Blake, I don't know. I feel like I've never really seen Brad Siegel discuss anything before, but it really came off in this episode like he was just kind of indifferent to an extent, which again hurts WCW, because Eric Bischoff literally wanted to just end Vince and do everything he could for WCW. Ted Turner was like, here, just do this. I love wrestling. I love WCW. Brad Siegel and some of these other guys kind of just didn't care. They had CNN and all these other networks. WCW was the redheaded stepchild of the network.
Said that. They've said that
even if how successful
times.
It was.
Yeah, Brad Siegel said he wanted nothing to do with WCW, and he just inherited it and all that other stuff.
Kept saying his memory was foggy, and like I just don't know where he wanted to stand.
That was my next point here with all of this. It felt like Siegel copped out with a bunch of stuff, like my memory's hey, sir, with all due respect, this was one of your largest revenue generators, and you're not going to tell me you don't remember who the hell you put in power? Come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, I mean, to me, that says exactly what I said, which is he told both guys what they wanted to hear, and he didn't have the answer. And he wasn't going to stand on there and go, actually, I told Vince he could run the show, and I told Eric he could run the show. Sorry, I fucked up.
Right. Corey, what do you think of the dynamic between Russo and Bischoff here?
They never liked each other, and they thought they were the alpha male, much like what Blake was just saying. Each one of them thought they were the one in charge. It's never going to work when it's like that. And it's something else that you brought up, Drew, that it kind of felt like Siegel was copping out. Something in particular that stood out to me that felt like he's kind of copping out was when he said, when Eric Bischoff said, I came back under the impression within my contract that I was overseeing Russo and overseeing creative. Russo denied it. They went to Siegel, and Siegel said, I guess, if Eric came back, I must have agreed to it. I was like, you know what you did. That was the first thing I thought. I was like, you know what you agreed to.
There's a lot of egos in the wrestling business, and there's obviously a lot of egos in the boardroom and in, front offices of multi-billion-dollar companies. I think Brad just probably doesn't want to accept any of the blame on that. And I understand, but realistically, I think Brad and Turner wanted nothing to do with WCW besides Ted. And all they were doing was pushing the shit as far as they could away from them. That's what I got.
Make a point off that, Drew. He doesn't want to be a part of something that's not successful. You see all of his Emmy awards in the background of his interview section and all that stuff, and these posters and all this success. I'm sure, it's fascinating to see the guys and girls that they got for this documentary in particular, outside of Hogan, of course, that they didn't get, but Eric Bischoff can practically just say whatever Hogan said. And that's just what it is. But it just feels like when they bring these other guys in that may have never, I don't know if I've ever seen Brad Siegel discuss this at any length on video, at least. So to see him with all those success things, and it's like, WCW's in the background,
which is crazy. It's a great point, right? Blake, Juice, and Corey. I was thinking about that same thing too when I was watching it, but I didn't bring it up because I just didn't think to. But it's a really good point. I'm watching this and I'm sitting back and being like, look at all that. And WCW was very successful, and he was part of the reason why WCW was successful. Why not be proud of that? Isn't that interesting? Just because it failed, they sold it to WWF. Vince McMahon, Brad looks at it as like a blemish on his career when realistically it wasn't. It was very successful for 3 years.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Eric Bischoff does a podcast based on the time that they were better than WWE.
Yeah.
Blake's got a theory on that.
Oh boy.
Look, I'm gonna go to Blake because I want to stay with Blake right quick because it's something that he brought up when he brought up the bad management. Kevin Nash is then shown, and they're talking to him, and they say they want him to look at 2 clips, and they show when Russo was talking to him, and they supposed to do it like the new blood supposed to be doing like a bloodbath thing, and
the red liquid.
Yes. And they completely miss him. And he talks about how they just kept doing it all day, I think, and rehearsing it or whatnot. And they just kept missing. And he misses again. And he says in there, now play those clips. You play that first. He said, and then play the finger poke of doom. He's like, what do you think more so contributed to the what killed WCW? Blake, seeing those, and I know you mentioned bad management. Are you sticking with bad management, not necessarily those creative things that happened on there as the reasons that really killed WCW?
Yeah, because to me that's a product of bad management. The execution of those angles in that show is a product of bad management. Nobody. I'm going to use WWF from back in. Obviously, we all know Vince is not somebody we like to speak of now, but back then. There's no chance in hell Vince ever let that get to air and they missed that bloodbath. That's bad management. So I still hold to that. I mean, yes, you can say it's a bad creative decision, but nobody, the thing that made WWF work was Vince was there to be the end all be all decision maker. WCW kind of had that with Eric for a short period of time, but after Eric left in '99, they never had a decision maker again.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point because when you get to that, so many of the talent in later years talk about that, how they were in WCW and it never felt like there was one person that you could go to, and when they were in WWF, they knew. No matter what, you may have talked to this person or that person, but the decision or the person that ultimately made the choice was Vince McMahon. And people talk about that to this day, how that is one of the things that made it night and day from the WCW locker room to the WWF locker room.
Yeah.
Vince Russo talks about it in this. He talks about how he would go to talent and he would see J.J. Dillon and Kevin Sullivan talking as well. If that happened in WWF back in the day, if Bruce Pritchard and Jim Cornette had differing ideas, what happened? They went to Vince and Vince made the decision. And Vince told the talent what they were going to do. WCW didn't have that. They had people going in both ears of people.
I will to that. Like both years, I think you're 100% right. I think the side conversations happen in WWF, or WWE, but at the end of the day,
the conflict, Vince solved it, and WCW didn't have that.
100%. It never went. It goes to Vince, and that's it. Like that's where the buck starts and stops. It doesn't go to Brad Siegel or WCW. There's nobody above Vince at that particular time, and Vince sees everything. And also to Blake's point, which was very good in my opinion, the whole bloodbath thing with Kevin Nash. They would have sent Nash out. WWF would have sent Nash out 5 more times until they got it right. And Vince wouldn't give a shit what the live audience thought about it or whatever else, because at that point it's taped and he wants the best possible product. And they would have sent Nash back, go get showered, go get a different pair of shorts and a shirt on, and we'll do it again. So to that point, he's right.
Yeah. And the next point I want to move on to, and once again, appreciate everybody tuning in. We wanted to do this live right after to get the best possible reactions to what we just witnessed. So appreciate
over
you
200 people in here. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, we really, really, really appreciate it.
They talk me on the show tonight.
there you go, Blake. See, so they move on and talk about the Millionaires Club against the New Blood and how, art imitates life. Pretty much that this was Vince Russo says this was pretty much the number one thing that in the wrestling business that. It was the number one conflict was the older established guys against the young bulls coming in. So with that being said, he said there was a lot of tension, real life tension that was bleeding into that storyline with the Millionaires Club. And Drew, I'm going to go to you first with that. With the Millionaires Club against the new blood coming in, you're seeing a lot of these guys like Billy Kidman and Shane Douglas, and just naming names that you notice they don't get the usual TV time. How do you think that helped WCW or hurt them in the initial start of that?
Well, Eric really touched on this. Eric sat back and was like, whenever you can blend realism into any storylines, it works. And I think he was 1,000 and continues to be 1,000% right there. I actually dug this. This was something that really captivated my, attention and desire to watch WCW at this point, because it was all this main event talent. It was everybody. You had never seen, Sting, Hogan, Nash, Goldberg, Flair. They were never on the same team for years and years and years. They were always separate. So for me, I dug it. And you were getting some guys that, were never given the opportunity. You had Shane Douglas in there. You had Jeff Jarrett. You had Booker T. There's a lot of people who, in my opinion, deserved the spot. So I liked the storyline. But again, this is something that always comes back to light. Again, the Millionaires Club was sick, in my opinion. It really was. It was really well done. They had Sid. There were so many different people in there. Steiner. There was just a lot of people who were making a lot of money. The problem was, and continues to always be, is Hulk Hogan's creative control clause. And that's one of the major factors that killed WCW, in my opinion, because all Hogan has to do is doesn't work for me, and it doesn't work for the company.
Yep.
Russo, for a lot of stuff that he did wrong, he saw the right in a lot of talent. I mean, the younger talent, the Benoits, the Guerreros, the Booker T's, the Mysterios. He saw a lot of talent in these men, and it's a shame that one person or a lot of other people wanting to hold these other talents down really killed WCW.
I'm going to disagree with you to a point with this, because I don't necessarily think it was Hogan's. I agree with you in the fact that I thought the Millionaires Club, when it first started, was awesome, but I don't think Hogan's creative control was a problem here. I think they didn't have any talent to go again. I mean, listen, no offense to Billy Kidman.
You're right.
But you're going to try to convince me that Billy Kidman's a worthy opponent for Hulk Hogan?
No,
I
agree with you there.
Shane
I'm just
Douglas
saying.
Was past his prime.
Mm-hmm.
His body was beaten to shit from his days in the ECW. He was far past his prime when he got into WCW. Guys like Jarrett. I mean, Booker T didn't even get a shot until 6 months later. Around Bash at the Beach,
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't a focal point. That's somebody that could have been a focal point when they first started it in April of 2000. And they didn't do that. So he was GI Bro at that point, I think, still. So, I mean, Buff Bagwell looked like $1 million, but we all know Buff was an absolute disaster.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it was more in the talent that was chosen to go against these guys.
Yes.
Were the wrong people.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I mean, when you're stacking everybody on that Millionaires Club, there's really nobody else worth a name value to go against besides Booker T and Jeff Jarrett. And if you're talking, and when you said it, Billy Kidman, Booker T, and Jeff Jarrett against Hogan, Nash, and Flair or Sting, no way. No way.
I mean, for God's sakes, 2 years earlier, Kidman was Sick Boy.
Yeah, that's right.
Don't you disparage the Flock.
I mean, you're telling me Sick Boy's supposed to go against Hulk Hogan, and I'm supposed to believe that. Okay.
First of all, don't you ever besmirch the Flock.
The Flock sucked.
You suck.
Outside of Raven.
Well, he was just Kidman. He wasn't Sick Boy. But
Sick Boy was another. Wasn't Sick Boy somebody else?
See, they
another character.
See,
I was just letting him roll with it.
Look, I wasn't. Don't worry. Go ahead, Juice.
So with the Millionaires Club, I'm in agreement with everybody here. I enjoyed the actual angle of it, where it was kind of truth and life imitating art, art imitating life. These guys are underneath, they're pissed off, much like whenever the invasion happened in 2001, and that was because of the contracts where you couldn't get a Nash or Goldberg or some of those guys to jump over immediately. At least it was, well, you have the new blood, but it's like, how many of those guys do we truly believe? To Blake's point, with GI Bro, like we couldn't have had Booker T a part of the new blood there. I enjoyed the dynamic of Kidman and Hogan, but to only an extent. Like you can only believe so much in regards to believability of who's going to win and whatnot. I mean, now that line is really blurred where, I mean, anybody could beat anybody at this point. To an extent, but something interesting. This is just a random fun fact that I bring to the table. The only WCW DVD ever produced was in Japan, and it was covering the feud of the Millionaires Club versus the New Blood. So if you can find it, it's out there. It's pretty hefty price, but you can find it.
I did not know that existed.
The fact that you know that.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah, that's wild. So we get to that point with the Millionaires Club and the New Blood. They're feuding, and they introduce a dynamic where they have this movie coming out, Ready to Rumble, and it has David Arquette in there, who at that time was relatively a big deal in Hollywood. He was a major Hollywood actor at that time. They use this as a catapult to bring eyes to the product, and they mentioned that Tony Schiavone brings up the idea that what if David Arquette wins the world championship?
And that's what Russo says, that Tony Schiavone said it. So let's just keep that in mind.
Oh, yeah.
What's interesting is Tony, like I'm sure Tony can and was available for this documentary. So
I think he has mentioned it before where he's like, yeah, I was like, yeah, why not? But like, I didn't think you'd actually do it,
So they do this, and the movie's a relative success, for them in terms of them getting eyes on the company. And they get David Arquette the world championship. And I'll go back to where Vince Russo says that Tony Schiavone in a creative meeting pitches this. He brings everybody back in. Excuse me. He has Schiavone pitch his idea again, and then all of a sudden he says, hey, everybody was on board with it. And then you start to go to DDP, and he's like pretty much thinking it's a rib or work, and saying no, it's okay, that's, and then they're really going with it. And DDP's like, and much of the other wrestlers they asked after the fact, they're saying there's no way this should have worked. What were y'all thoughts on it? Blake, go ahead and go first.
So I'm going to go back to my theme of the night, in theme of really this series: bad management, poor execution. The thought behind putting David Arquette in a primary spot to maximize publicity and get more buzz is really sound. It's something we see WWF has done time and time again, and are very successful at. But first of all, they did it on Thunder, which was the secondary program. If WWF was, first of all, WWF would have never made a celebrity their world champion unless it was somebody that had been in there and like converted over, like say Ronda did, and became a regular performer. But WWE would have built to a pay-per-view. They wouldn't have just popped it on a random TV episode. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think the thought of, hey, this movie's doing pretty well, let's get David on the show and let's do something with David to get publicity, is great. And it's very sound and it's very business savvy. But it was just executed piss poorly.
Yeah, Drew, go ahead.
I think this is a perfect example, like to piggyback off what Blake said. I think this is a perfect example of a company filled with yes men. Instead of sitting back and being like, no, which DDP and some others did, Bischoff should have had, I know hindsight being 2020, but the foresight to see this and be like, no. I put a tweet out. They could have put, and again, to Blake's point, they could have put any championship they wanted on Arquette besides the World Heavyweight Championship, and that's son of a bitch would have been on the cover of USA Today because it's David Arquette, it's WCW, and it's a wrestling championship. You know, if maybe you give him the hardcore championship, probably not. But any other major singles championship at that point, the U.S. title, the television title, even a tag team title, would have done big business. They did not need to go this route, and I don't believe that this was solely Tony Schiavone's idea. I'm sorry, Vince. I just don't buy it. Because I think Tony has a ton of respect for the business to where he's not writing for today or pitching for today. He's also going to look out for the future. And as much as I respect Vince Russo and what he was able to accomplish in WWF and even WCW, he wrote for the here and now and today. And a lot of times that doesn't work in professional wrestling. It doesn't. So the Arquette thing, in my opinion, was very well thought out. The world championship, giving it to him was the worst execution you could have ever done.
Yep. Juice, go ahead.
And to your point, Drew, the match was already made. Like, who know what was the decision before? Let's just say everything happened that Vince Russo said, and Tony Schiavone said, "What if Arquette wins the title?" What was the finish going to be before that? Like, we don't even know. Like, why was he even in the match? And he could have won the tag title. It would have been fantastic. I'm going to add.
He didn't have to win any title.
He didn't. He just needed to be on.
David Arquette being in that match would have probably gotten you in the USA Today.
And
yeah,
I
mean,
similar to
Malone?
Rodman and Malone.
Right.
And to Blake's point, where'd they do that? Oh yeah, pay-per-view. Yep. And we talked about that last week with the Goldberg of it all. I'm going to ask you guys all while I have the panel up. Mm-hmm. You have to pick one. For who would you rather have as world champion, David Arquette or Vince Russo?
We have to answer that.
Yeah, because both happened and they both sucked. Which was better? You have to pick one.
I'll go first here. I'm going to go Arquette because the whole plan behind Arquette was to promote a movie that WCW was in, and when you really think about this, why I think Russo's full of shit is because Vince Russo wanted a tournament, and he got one because he put the championship on Arquette, and then Arquette relinquished it. I mean, Arquette could have defended that championship that next night, but he just relinquished the title, or that Monday, and he just relinquished the title.
But there was no tournament, though. That was the Triple Cage at Slamboree 2000, which David Arquette turned on DDP, and Jeff Jarrett won the title. So, that's an underrated pay-per-view.
Right, but what I'm saying is like you got to go with
that too before you actually do it.
Yeah, another promotional material for the movie, though, right? The Triple Cage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is where the David Arquette match should have happened to begin with, not on Thunder. Back to my original point.
Lead it to Slamboree instead of Thunder.
To answer Juice's question, hands down, it's Arquette because there was at least some potential business effects, positive business effects from having David Arquette coming off a movie that was making money in your storylines. I think Vince Russo gets a lot of hate that is not warranted, but him putting himself as the world champion was the height of stupidity. Yeah. It was exactly what he said in the episode, and he's told me this personally in conversations I've had with him. I didn't think these guys could do it, so I was going to go do it myself, which was just absolutely asinine.
Yeah, when he said I'm better than 80% of this roster, I literally spit out my food.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, to answer your question, Drew, Juice, it is going to be David Arquette because of the intent. I get why they were doing it. It's just the execution was absolutely horrible and the idea behind it. But if I've got to pick one of the two, yeah, it's absolutely David Arquette because there's at least some kind of end goal of something to be achieved or gained from that. Vince Russo at the end of the day was the head of creative. And it just looked bad to book himself into winning the world championship. And he says the reason why is, like Drew just mentioned, he felt he was better than 80% of the roster. So if he wants ratings, he might as well go out there and get it himself.
Are you going to get ratings all right? They're going to plummet. But again, can we look at the theme here? I think an underlining thing that a lot of people aren't talking about. Who killed WCW? Every time Eric Bischoff is taken out of power, whether it's writing or creative, whether it's Nash or Russo or Sullivan, the ratings and everything else plummets. And 2 of those 3 guys put themselves as world champions.
Yeah.
Terrible. Absolutely terrible.
Yeah, no. You're right. And that's a great correlation. And you're starting to see in this that for as much flack that Eric Bischoff has gotten over the decades of how he was part of the blame for WCW going out of business, this is the most positive painting of Eric Bischoff in this series that I've ever seen in regards to the demise of WCW. Because hearing this story, yes, he's at fault for a lot of things, but it seems like what you just mentioned, Drew, the common denominator was every time Bischoff was not in power, something went haywire.
Well, I mean, the reason he's painted in a positive light is because this is Eric's narrative of what happened with WCW.
True. Yeah.
I kept my mouth shut because I was praying that was going to be said by Blake, because we've had these conversations before, and I was like, please.
And I will say that I agree with most of it. I think that Eric's narrative, as far as he doesn't blame Russo or any of this, he blames the merger and the bad management by Turner's, and I agree with most of that. But this is 100%. That's why Eric is involved in every single episode. This is 100% Eric's narrative and Eric's story.
You know who's also involved in this a lot, which was surprising to me? Like every episode is Conan.
Yeah.
It means that he's there, and it's a great
outside. Have you listened to Conan's podcast, by the way?
No, but I mean, every other weekend he flies into the DMs being like, "Yo, check out the podcast." I'm like, all right, dude, thanks.
I brought it up.
Good dude. But I mean, yes. No, I haven't. I've seen their stuff. I've listened to the years prior, and it seems like he does good work. So God bless him. But I think Conan's perspective on this, not listening to his podcast or his YouTube stuff or whatever, watching that, is very, very unique, and it brings a lot to the table.
It's very down the middle too. Like,
yes,
Conan has kind of, and I think he's friendly with Vince. He has a reputation of being, a Russo guy, or he was critical of the stuff some of the stuff that Russo did tonight. So that's, I agree with you, Drew, and I think Conan is right down the middle, whereas you can kind of, with some of these guys, you can pick the narrative, what side of the fence they were on. You can't. Yeah. Conan's doesn't come off that way.
I think Conan, the people that I've actually met and talked to and have conversations with, Conan and Nash have the most brilliant minds for professional wrestling and the art form of it and storytelling.
It comes off in this. Even Nash was like, Russo, like, I like Vince, but like this isn't working. Like he's able to, be nice to somebody, but absolutely tell them what is or not going on the right way and try to direct them some way, even if it's, his mind and his pocket is in the background with that decision making. But they've been calling it pretty much down the middle,
Yeah. So. And Russo's only here for a year, right, guys? Right? 1 year?
Oh my God. From like basically, so what, Havoc 99 to the beginning of January, and then April to maybe near the end,
right?
And he signed a 5-year deal.
It's really like September to October the next year, with like a 3 or 4 month gap in the middle. So it wasn't even he wasn't even on the job for a full year.
Those contracts that WCW handed out, I mean, holy moly!
And all of those details are available on the interwebs, and you can see how much Horace Hogan made in a particular year, and it's just like, why couldn't I have been available as a pro wrestler in '98? I would have been set for life. So
one of the things, Juice brought up Nash, and one of the things to me that kind of sunk in watching this is part of when it comes to Vince Russo, Vince had that, and I remember back in '99, Vince had that mystique of, the guy behind Raw, the guy behind WWE's rating, like, he's the genius. Yes, Vince McMahon was a big portion of it, but I also think something that Nash is alluding to is like, this ain't going to work over here, because when Vince started writing or took power, let's say, in WWF, it was a bunch of up-and-coming guys that were, Steve was on the come-up, Rock was on the come-up, Triple H was on the come-up. All these guys were young and hungry, and he didn't have to deal with Hogan. He didn't have to deal with Ric Flair. He didn't have to deal with, all these egos. Yes, he had Vince McMahon to deal with them for him, but as far as being open to his ideas, and I'm not saying his ideas would have worked. Some of his shit was just wild, but
Mm-hmm.
he didn't have to deal with people in WWF that weren't open to his ideas because they were all just looking to become stars. Where he had guys that like Flair and Hogan that had been on top for 30 years and like they thought they knew better than everybody else. So they're not going to listen to a guy like Russo.
And
Right,
they didn't
well,
want to be
Vince-
progressive as much as a guy. Sorry to cut you off, Drew, but like Russo was. And sometimes I feel like maybe once he got to WCW, it's almost outside of just like the Hogan of it all and like those guys that wouldn't let him kind of breathe with his creativity. I feel like Russo probably overthought things to an extent where like, this needs to happen and this needs to happen and this needs to happen. And it's like, just slow it down a little bit. One thing can get attached to the fans and then it could go a long way. So it's just a lot of problems there.
The biggest thing that there was a couple things, but one of the biggest things was something that Blake and I think Juice touched on. The wrestlers and the boys backstage did not respect Vince Russo because Vince Russo never made any of those boys. The reason they respected McMahon was because McMahon made Hulk Hogan. He made Macho Man hand in hand. He made all those other guys and the girls that went over there. But again, the biggest thing for me was Vince McMahon took Vince Russo's ideas and buffered out the bullshit and kept the good stuff. He's basically what you see as some of these content creators out here now where they see and hear other things, and some of them are more well-spoken than others, and then they go on their shows and use them verbatim, but it's just how they can capture that audience with different words. And that's what Vince was doing. Vince Russo was pitching, and Vince McMahon was like, good idea, shitty idea, good idea, shitty idea. I'll take the good ideas, and I'm moving on. And that
he was the buffer.
He buffered out most of them. I mean, Beaver Cleavage
yes.
still did make TV for WWE at one point.
Right.
Yeah.
We can't absolve WWF of all their bad ideas. There's definitely their fair share.
Some of them, I mean, Al Snow and Big Boss Man did have a Hell in the Cell where they ate a dead dog. I mean,
Corey, did you like the hiring of Russo? Like, what did you think of that time period for Russo and WCW?
At that point for WCW, they had been losing bad, and they were, head above the water, trying to reach out, trying to grab something to swim instead of sink. And the Vince Russo life ring was right there that they thought would be ultimately the thing that could possibly pull them back above water and be able to swim with WWF again. And it comes to find out that life ring had a big old hole in it. And as soon as they went into it, all the air came out.
That was well said. This was a save us, please. We're drowning, and then you threw that ring out.
Desperation move.
Yeah, and you threw that ring out, and you sunk with it.
Yep, you sure did. So, with that being said, there's somebody who has been painted in this series as kind of the, if you could say, the up and comer and the guy that was looked at to at least get something out of this WCW experience, and it's Booker T. And we're getting to Bash at the Beach 2000, and they're to the point now where the story, and loosely saying it, they wanted to do another work shoot where Hogan goes in, he wins the title and disappears with the title and beats Jarrett, and then he's going to come back at Halloween Havoc. That's not the case for Vince Russo. Vince hears what Bischoff and Hogan's idea is, and according to Bischoff, he works it into his own idea and goes completely away from what they were going to do. And you get Jeff Jarrett laying down in the middle, Hogan gets the belt, and Hogan's gone. And Vince Russo comes out and he gives his promo, which, according to Vince, he still thought that was going to be the plan. But Hogan is not going to be the champion. But then it turns into him going off on the rails and just going. He says it wasn't his intent to, demean Hogan or run him down or anything like that. But he kind of pretty much goes in and eviscerates Hogan. And that's really, and not really, that is the last time we see Hulk Hogan on WCW television.
Wasn't this the most confusing thing on the episode, Corey? I mean,
yes.
Russo's saying one thing, which is the narrative here, but this was what was going to happen. This was a work. And then you have the whole locker room saying it's a shoot. And then you have Bischoff and Hogan talking about how when they landed, their phones wouldn't stop buzzing. And Hogan then ended up suing WCW. So how the hell was this a work?
Yeah, that's what was weird about it, was that they kept trying to go back to the Bischoff and Hogan are trying to go back to, well, Russo didn't stick with the plan, and Russo saying, well, I thought this was the plan anyway, that Hogan's not getting the belt, and he went with what he thought was right, and he went away from what was perceived by Bischoff and Hogan as the plan, because, like you mentioned, they're on the plane, and they get off, and everybody's talking about, hey, at the pay-per-view, Booker T is fighting Jeff Jarrett, and they're crowning a champion. And Hogan is oblivious to all of this. He's on a plane. And like you mentioned, he ends up suing them because he feels that the narrative that was presented at the end of the day was Hogan was this big jerk, and Russo finally stood up to him, and somebody put Hogan in his place, and Hogan was not happy with that. Juice, go ahead. I know you were.
Yeah, I think it was like a defamation of character lawsuit, if I'm not mistaken.
It was. I have it in front of me. You're right.
Yeah, it's just it's a lot of he said, she said. I'm 99% sure they did a Dark Side of the Ring episode on this pay-per-view.
Yep.
And if you have 3 hours and you have nothing better to do with your life, and you have a beverage or something else that keeps you entertained, I would say go out and watch this show. It seems like a fever dream. It's wild stuff where, and Corey, you brought it up. Hogan and Bischoff had an idea. When it all happens, and then Russo does go into business for himself under the impression that Hogan and Bischoff are going to see it as, oh, it's just another work. We're all working together. And then it's like, well, that's not what we actually talked about. And I think just the butting heads of all three of those guys caused a lot of problems. But the guy who ends up winning here, Booker T, as we're going to get to.
But I'm going to go back to my theme of the night with this. And it's illustrated in this episode, and it's illustrated in the Dark Side of the Ring episode that Juice just mentioned. Vince Russo in tonight said 2 days before Bash at the Beach, Brad Siegel told him, nope, you're head of creative. Eric, in that Dark Side of the Ring, there's a whole story and a whole scene painted of the day of Bash at the Beach. They're in a trailer. It's Bischoff, Hogan, Russo. Brad Siegel's on the phone. Each side pitches their idea. Brad Siegel says, go with Eric's idea.
Correct.
Again, Brad Siegel playing both sides, telling both guys what they wanted to hear. You're never going to get anywhere with that because both guys think they're in power. Both guys think they're calling the shots. So when in the last minute, when Russo thinks he lost and Bischoff's idea is the one they're going with, he does. He goes into business for himself and does something else.
The worst place ever. Sorry, Drew. The worst place ever to just tell everybody what they want to hear is pro wrestling, with the ego and opinionated way of how wrestlers go about it, because you have to save yourself. Sometimes you have to be selfish in a business like that.
Somebody's got to be the asshole.
Yes. And when someone's just like, well, I'm going to tell you this, but I'm also going to tell them this. I don't think Brad Siegel had any idea what he was really doing. And now he's a part of seeing what he actually, helped.
I'm going to take some heat off of Brad Siegel here, because what I think really happened, and don't get me wrong, I think Brad played both ends at times, and then he tried to play him against the middle. What I'm saying is, I think the biggest thing here is that Russo was brought in under the assumption that he answered to nobody. And as soon as Russo had to answer to Bischoff or anybody else, Russo was like, fuck this, I'm out. And then he went into business for himself. So he heard what he didn't want to hear on Friday, 2 days before the pay-per-view, Bash at the Beach, because this was well documented in the Dark Side of the Ring, like Blake and Juice touched on, and Corey. And now all of a sudden Russo's like, well, fuck it, I'm doing what I want. And that's what he did Bash at the Beach. So I just think Vince didn't want to answer to anybody, and that's what he thought he was brought in under.
To your point, he didn't want to answer to anybody because he was told he didn't have to. So again, it falls back on management.
That's right. It's all Brad Siegel's fault.
Bad
But-
man.
I mean, Brad is the
They
fall guy.
sent
in this
Russo
episode
home.
because he's the guy talking. But
Yeah,
it's
I
mean,
know.
from 96
It's a lot
to
more than
2000,
him,
Not
yeah.
all of those decisions are on Brad. Just this
No.
this episode tonight is on Brad.
Right, but Blake, I mean, they sent Russo home, and then they bring him back, and then they bring Bischoff back, and they said, supposedly Russo knew that Eric was now his boss.
That's
So-
that's the way this was edited, but I can tell you from conversations with Vince, that's not his narrative. His
Yeah.
narrative is that he was head of creative the entire time and that him and Eric were supposed to work together.
Collaborate.
Eric's narrative, again, the narrative of this show, Eric's narrative is Eric was brought back in to oversee Russo.
And it's interesting you mentioned that, Blake, because on screen they are working together, you know?
Yeah,
And
dude, you want to talk about a wild night? I remember that. I remember watching that live.
let's
Yep, me
take
too.
all the belts away from everybody and just reset everything and have all these tournaments Russo special at Spring Stampede. It's a wild wild
That was
scene,
another.
WCW
That was another
2000.
thing. That was another thing. Way too many resets for a wrestling company to
Oh,
flourish.
100%. Yeah.
You can never
Yeah.
get your bearings and
Nope.
character changes. Mike Awesome should have been Mike Awesome, and he was 15 different guys before they figured out.
No,
You
come
know
on,
what?
dude. The Fat Chick Thriller was awesome.
No, the 70s guy was awesome. just keep going with how many gimmicks Mike Awesome could have possibly had. When he first came in, he was amazing.
He did have a good opening.
Yeah,
a good
beat up
debut
Kevin Nash.
against
Dude, Mike Awesome was a killer in ECW, and they should have just kept it.
Yeah. It should have
Yeah.
stuck right there. So we get to the point where Bischoff is gone because he's gone when Hogan is gone. And they talk about what you all just mentioned, the different resets and trying to see what they can throw to the wall and have it stick. And we mentioned it earlier in the show. It's getting to the point now where once again, somebody is putting themselves in the position of being the world champion. And Russo starts booking to where he is in a lot of segments and his character is in a lot of the
Dude,
storyline.
he was all
Mhm.
over the show.
Yeah, he was. And much like I'll borrow a line from Juice, if you have time, go back and watch some of those late 2000 Nitros. He's literally on there at the beginning, all the way through the show to the end. And it's amazing to see that. And Vince Russo talks about how he started to feel that a lot of people weren't protecting him, they weren't taking care of him, and they were taking their liberties on him in these situations of being in matches. He particularly talks about
I would have too.
when he talks about when the match where he actually wins the world title, the spear from Goldberg, and he says he tells Goldberg like 10 times, I've got a concussion, just I'm gonna make my way up to the entrance ramp. He's supposed to be speared through the
Watch
set.
watch the kick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Watch the kid. So mind you, Russo's in this horrible garbage outfit, Giants uniform. Sorry, don't care. He's in his Giants uniform and helmet and everything, and he's trying to work where he's going to get up the entranceway to get speared, and Goldberg spears him through the cage, and his head literally ricochets off of the guardrail to where I'm looking back at it now. I remember it happening then, but I'm really looking at it now, and I'm like, if he doesn't have that helmet on,
Yes.
he's not getting up at all. Go ahead, Juice.
No, that's all I was gonna say. I was just gonna say, like, if he doesn't have that helmet to be a part of that ridiculous thing, like, he's not a part of this documentary. He's somewhere else. It's a whole crazy story. But I'll let Drew take it away. There, he was gonna
Go ahead,
say
Drew.
something.
I think if you put this into perspective, majority of us like getting plucked. Let's just say one of us gets plucked to go right for WCW at this point, right? One of the four of us on here, and you're in a locker room. Right. You're okay. Right. So then you book yourself. One of us books ourselves into the world title picture and wins it. You don't think the guys and girls who have paid their dues and have literally put asses in the seats and sold merch and got ratings and got $1 million contracts are going to take their liberties with you in the ring when you have never taken a bump or even paid your dues. Goldberg is lucky he wasn't charged with murder, because I don't blame him. I don't blame any of them.
Listen, I don't think Goldberg did that on purpose. You're not going to tell me that Goldberg could pinpoint spear Vince Russo to make his head bounce off of a railing.
It was this close to the actual entrance ramp. I will give him that. And I don't think the intent was to hurt him, but where he landed
Goldberg's just a big dumb dipshit that doesn't know his own strengths.
Look, I'm gonna say this. If you don't think that those boys and girls took extra potatoes and extra liberties with Russo,
I'm with you there, but that's my point. Yeah. If it would have been Goldberg punching him, I see that 100%. But you're not going to sit here and tell me that Goldberg was standing in that Hell in a Cell style cage and is like, you know what, that fucking guardrail right there, I'm going to bounce his head right off of this and I'm going to spear him right. There's no way.
I bet you if you got Bill a couple beers, maybe some tequilas, Bill probably tell you wish he killed that mother. Truthfully.
Yeah, well,
maybe.
Well, he kind of said something to that effect where he says, if I was doing it on purpose,
put him in the ground.
Yeah.
Bill's a big bad mother. I'm telling you.
That's
a big boy. You okay?
Oh,
we're
shooting here.
Nah.
He's
and
like
once
60.
again,
I'm only 40. I'm good.
Once again, we appreciate everybody tuning in and listening to us. This third episode of WCW, Who Killed WCW, pretty much covered that in between part where they're out of what the NWO was doing and they're losing at this point, and they've been losing throughout this entire show as far as the timeline of where they were as a company. They were already losing and continuing to lose.
Yeah.
They were already dead.
They were literally treading water at this point. And the last part, because we're going to put a pin in this so we can wrap up. And like I said, once again, appreciate everybody being here tonight. They pretty much lead us into what you're getting next is they pretty much can't get a deal, and Eric Bischoff's trying to put them in a situation of, hey, let's sell the company while they've got some assets and are still somewhat valuable. And this next episode is going to pretty much cover that last couple of months of WCW and that WCW Nitro. Final thoughts. Go ahead, Drew.
Yeah, listen, the first 3 episodes, a lot of people are like, well, I mean, there's really, what have I missed? I mean, everything has pretty much been the same. And yeah, that's the point of a miniseries, a 4-part miniseries. It's weekly episodic 4 parts of a show. So we're going to get the conclusion, and I'm sure we'll get testimonials and opinions and testimonials on who they think killed WCW from all the men and women we saw in this. But what I will say is, there's a reason why WWF at the time acquired WCW, and that's because Eric put a ridiculous clause in a contract when he was trying to acquire them, and I don't blame him for it, but it was absolutely asinine to ask media
so much
to say that he gets a lifetime contract to put whatever he wants on that time slot.
Have you seen the actual contract?
Yeah, it's out there. It's in the Nitro book, and it's on the web. Yes. So Eric asked.
I can't believe that that's the actual wording of it. That he can pull his dick out and put his dick on TBS for if he wants for the rest of his life.
But the contract.
They call it the mothership.
Right. The ask was, if you decide to can WCW, we could put programming on this time slot on this network as we see fit. No network was ever going to agree to that. But I think what we're going to see in episode 4 is hopefully a lot of people's opinions on who killed WCW and then maybe a conclusion. Hopefully a conclusion. But either way,
go ahead.
I've enjoyed what they've done because this is the non-WWE narrative and we've uncovered some gems.
I think that is the conclusion you're going to see to this series. Is they're going to go around the room to everybody and well, who killed WCW? And Vince Russo's going to say Eric Bischoff. Eric Bischoff's going to say management. Goldberg's going to say Vince Russo. Bret Hart's going to say Hulk Hogan, Eric Bischoff, Vince Russo, fucking everybody but me. I mean, that's what it's going to be. They're going to show you that last couple of months, like Corey's going to put that. that's in my mind. That's what the ending of this miniseries is going to be, is going to each and every person that you've seen and who killed it. And I can't wait for, like I said, Bret Hart to say,
I don't know
who killed it. I know I didn't, because I didn't do it. I never do anything wrong. But
yeah, Brett's contract was a big one, but it didn't kill WCW in Brett's eyes. I think and I haven't seen episode 4. Some people have, it seems, so good for them. For me, again, to Blake's point, I would pass around the iPad like they did in The Last Dance, and even like what they did with Nash. And I would have people watch other people's testimonials, like Goldberg watch Bret Hart's testimony on who killed WCW, and Bret and Goldberg can answer it. I think that would be very
maybe that's what Bret will say. Goldberg killed it when he kicked me in the head and ruined my career.
I referenced that, I think, in episode 1. I believe Brian Gewirtz mentioned that they at least did that. I'm not sure if they filmed it and it's going to be a part of episode 4, but I mean, what better time than that last episode to do that? I'm looking forward to, outside of it just being immensely depressing, as I've brought up every single episode here outside of the first one. I'm looking forward to seeing that random behind the scenes footage of the final Nitro, what I've never really seen before. I'm curious as to more just details, if there are any, about that potential relaunch, the Big Bang pay-per-view. There's an ad out there that is real that was circulated where it was in early May where they would relaunch, another reset. Go figure.
But do you have the t-shirt?
No, it never happened, so no, I don't. And of course, this show happened where I wasn't really prepared. I would have had my Bash of the Beach 2000 shirt on, but next week I will have something prepared, so that'll be that. But one other thing before, go ahead.
You're going to get part of the story of what the plan was, because this is Eric's story. So Eric's going to tell you how he was going to,
how great it was going to be,
and how the plan and everything about it before. Turner, and I've heard Eric say this in the past and other things, before Turner just decided they didn't want to have WCW on TV anymore, so they sold it to Vince for $3 or $4 million or whatever it was.
And the last thing I'll mention, I'm sure we'll potentially bring it up more next week, but with Booker T, because we briefly talked about it, what a rise for him. And I think he's one of the guys that actually won out of being in WCW for so long. He, outside of Sting, of course, but Booker T literally tapped out, submitted to the Shockmaster at Fall Brawl 93, 1 month after the debut of the Shockmaster, and ended up being a 5-time WCW champion, who arguably is one of the best things WCW ever had on their roster. So I hope we get a little bit more closure into where he is, because that story with him and Arquette was fascinating, where Arquette was like, look, man, I should not be here doing this. Yeah. And Booker T said it the same way. He's like, you know what? He admitted it, but it's my opportunity. I'm going to take advantage of it.
Arquette was almost his biggest supporter at that point.
That's right.
Arquette opened the doors, Corey, for Booker, in my opinion.
Yeah. So with my thoughts on next
week, don't you dare take that away from Vince Russo.
With my thoughts on next week, I definitely am looking forward to the behind the scene footage of the last Nitro, and it's really going to put a pin in, because we've always kept hearing all of these different stories about WCW's end, who was to blame, and this granted is another chapter in that, but it's going to be an interesting finish to this, so I'm definitely looking forward to it. Drew, go ahead.
Yeah, again, I'm looking forward to episode 4. This has been a great series. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Make sure you hit that like, subscribe, and follow button here on Final Bell Media. Hit notifications so when we go live, you'll know. This was kind of very much impromptu. We wanted to see how many live people we would get. We have a ton. We appreciate it. And I'm assuming the people that aren't consuming this now will consume it in the morning or in the afternoon, and we appreciate that as well. Over 300 people here live on all of our accounts. So again, very much appreciated. Juice, why don't you tell everyone where they could follow you?
At Juicy Steen on Twitter, and every Friday, wherever you listen to podcasts, you can listen to the Juice Box, where I discuss current wrestling in the week that was, but I'm always down to talk WCW, as I have with all 3 of you great gentlemen tonight. No Ellis tonight, but Blake, known you for a while. Great to have you in the fold. Drew, of course, known you for a while, of course. And Corey, who's been to every Starrcade. And I was like, I can't believe this is happening. What a great person to have for this review. So it's been great every single week, and I'm looking forward to next week.
And Corey's going to be in the building for AW Dynamite tomorrow. So there you go. He goes to a lot of wrestling.
14 other people.
Hey.
Oh,
We couldn't hear you, Blake. We couldn't hear you, Blake. You cut out.
Oh, sorry.
Corey, why don't you tell where everybody can like, subscribe, and follow you? You did Turnbuckle Talk today. It was interesting.
Yes,
I listened.
Yeah, so I was ready to say I was on Turnbuckle Talk earlier on Under the Black Wrestling Podcast, who drops their BRP 50, highlighting the top 50 black wrestlers over the last 12 months this year. So that comes out.
Do you know the top 5?
They've been putting stuff out, but I don't know the top 5. But you all will have to find out tomorrow.
Okay.
But I'm at My Kicks Are My Fix on IGX, wrestling sneakers, wrestling belts. I'm trying to figure out what I'll bring out tomorrow for Dynamite, but yeah, that's what I talk, and that's me in a nutshell.
Did you get the Young Buck shoes?
Yes. Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
So you braid those out? You got to braid those out now.
No, because I think
collector's item.
A lot of people. No, a lot of people are going to be wearing them tomorrow. I'll save it for something else.
Got it. All right. I dig it. I dig it. Corey likes to be unique. I dig it. He likes to be the only person with the shoes or the belt that he's rocking. I dig it. I dig it.
No,
Man's got a sense
I
of
just
style.
know everybody's going to have them on. That's why I'm good. I can wait.
You're right. You're right. Blake, where can everyone like, subscribe, and follow you?
I don't need anybody to follow me.
So humble.
You and Ellis with that stupid gimmick.
My Twitter handle's just my name, and I don't really. My last name's kind of long, and I don't really feel like spelling it out on here. So I mean, if you
It's
want
so easy though.
It is, but you'd be surprised how many people butcher it. If you want to follow me, find the tweets that were put out for this show. My Twitter handle's in there. If you don't, that's good too.
I mean, so we had some guy calling me Andrew Bodega. I mean, they could call you. I mean, Mitch Moore's not hard, dude.
Andrew
Mitch Moore's not hard.
Bodega.
Andrew Bodega.
Mr. Clean, whatever you want to call him.
Egghead.
Egghead, yeah, that's Mr. Egghead. The final Egghead, yes. That was all very fun to deal with. I am at Andrew Badal. He is at Blake Mitchmore. I won't spell it for you, but it's very easy. Like Juice said, that's Juice Springsteen, Juicy Steen on Twitter. The host with the most is Corey Saunders at My Kicks Or My Fix. Again, make sure you hit that like, subscribe, and follow button. Who Killed WCW episode 3 is now in the books. The final bell stuff's over there. Make sure you like, subscribe, and follow. I'm Sean Evans. Yes, that I guess I am his doppelganger or whatever they call it. So there you go.
Yeah, I thought that was a part of my contract to have my name on the screen somewhere. What the hell?
Yeah, you didn't pay your dues.
Son of a bitch.
We are live this Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Myself and the other guy next to me. That's Blake.
My name will be on the screen that day. Damn it.
Yes, that will be. We will be talking AEW Dynamite. Corey's going to be live in the building, so maybe we'll ask Corey to jump in if he can to get a first-hand recollection of what happened.
No, he's not allowed on my show on Friday.
We'll have to see. A burner account says, "Is that Taz?" You know what, Taz? Security guard. A lot of people say the same thing. You've gotten Taz a lot, Blake. He's gone. You pissed him off. All right. Well, we appreciate it. Thank you guys very much. Juice, thanks for your knowledge. Corey, thanks for hosting and always your knowledge. Make sure you like, subscribe, and follow. Enjoy the rest of some places it's Wednesday morning. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Good night, everybody.